Ajnanaatimirandasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Gurudev. Śrīmad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 12, Verse 13. Matkamaaramananjaram ashvarupa vido balaha brahmaman paramam prabhu sangachata sahasrashaha. All those hundreds of thousands of gopis understanding me to be their most charming lover, and those who are ardently desiring me in that way, they were unaware of my actual position. Yet they intimately associated with me. The gopis attained me, the absolute, supreme absolute. This is Lord Krishna saying how the gopis related to him. And the essence of what he says is they didn't really know, and maybe they also didn't bother so much that he is God. And this is also the sweetness of bhakti. Let's say when we, at some point, it doesn't really matter anymore who Guruji is, because you go into a realm, you go into a stage where really the relationship only matters. So in bhakti, it's not so important how we consume the love of God, but it's much more important how we love Him. And then when it all comes down to relationship, I believe then it all comes down to how we behave in that relationship. Yeah, pretty much like in any relationship. And this can look very weird to people who don't know about this and who are not interested in such things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why spiritual people are often labeled as crazy from the outside. Because it is something that is from the heart. It is not something from the mind. And since we are living in the age of the mind, then how can you access, how can you go along and feel in such a way? You know, because the bhakti path, people coming and feeling close to Guruji, it all goes to the how you feel about it. So if you don't feel anything, the danger is there to judge, crazy people. And actually, it's not only about Bhakti Marga that we easily get labeled as maybe crazy or a little bit very exotic. But I believe it's about any spiritual group or even anyone who dares to inquire about the goal of life. Because if you just move along with the mainstream and all the 60, 80 or 100 years you're on this planet, you don't dare the question of what is this all about? What is life? And you open up to love. Then if you don't bother about these questions, you know, then of course, yeah, you will not be labeled as crazy. Or maybe you will be labeled as crazy from God. Who knows? So, yeah, I wanted to touch a couple of points here as to why us or any spiritual group might be labeled as crazy. So the first one is we are open to attain an unlikely goal. So to attain God and to know about God, let's say when you go along with the Bhagavad Gita, or even if you're not Hindu, even if you're not Bhakti Marga devotee, but if you just, as I said, dare to ask the question, what is the goal of life? Or as we would put it, who is the goal of life? And if you really inquire into that question, I think sooner or later you do come across the Bhagavad Gita. These sacred teachings and actually the introduction of Lord Krishna himself to us. And then if you go even one step further and say, actually it would be nice to attain the lotus feet of the Lord, then I would say you are aiming for a very, very high goal. I mean, Krishna himself, he says, like maybe 1 out of 1,000,000, and then again 1 out of 1,000,000, etc. And then the simple mind might think, oh well, then it's more likely I win the lottery. But it's not like this. With Krishna, it's actually very simple. If you want him, he will make everything happen, you attain him. It's just that the ratio of the people who really want him is so very, very small. That's why he says 1 out of 1,000,000. 1 out of 1,000,000 who really go and venture into this highest goal. And that's why maybe us here who are actually venturing into this goal, or anyone who dares to ask the question of who is God and can I attain God and will I actually make it happen in this life? And then maybe you become devotee, brahmachari, and then you dress in special clothing, you engage in certain activities because you have made that decision. And then of course the people who don't venture into that then easily might judge you and say, well, you're a crazy person. Because they are right in a way. It is a little bit crazy and borderline to actually in one life say, I want to actually finish the big wheel of always coming back. I want to finish these millions of incarnations that already have flown down the river over the ages. And then there must be a way to actually step out of this and attain a realm of perfect happiness. Now that is a very borderline goal. But as Krishna says, if you want it, he will make it happen. The second point is why spiritual people might be labeled as crazy, as I would say, is the heaviness of purification. Because there's so much purification. I mean, I was just spending the past 3 days dying, actually, because you go through walls of inner resistance, you go through layers of, maybe especially in the Shivaratri spirit, that you get removed of past skin and past identity. And was just talking to somebody yesterday evening, and we both agreed, actually, we don't want to change. And that anyone who is actually going through the changes, because maybe Guruji, by his grace, he pushes you through a certain stage, but it's so painful to let go of certain things, and we're so attracted and attached to certain things that, no. I mean, just get any person, maybe you have a stadium full of people, and you say, do you want to change? Yes, we want to change. No, it's not true. Nobody wants to change. If you know what is the price, no, and we all know what is the price, we don't want to change. So that's why also it might be crazy to say, perceived as crazy from the outside. Now you take a guru who actually helps you and pushes you to go through this change, so it actually really happens, and that you do attain that realm of happiness. Because it is real and it is true that after every such process, we do arrive at a higher level of love, and we, of course, feel much better. I feel much better now than I felt maybe 1 week ago. But in between, there was a short episode of dying of ego, of dying of past things, and this is the heaviness of purification. Now, if I walk along here with a long face, and people, even in Bhakti Marga you get judged, you know. So what about people from not on the spiritual path? If they see you run around and you're going through heavy purification, easily the temptation is there to say, you're crazy. Because the purification is not so shallow, because connected to the first point, if you really want to attain the Lord in this life, then let's say what I would call the box of Pandora is open. Let's say you have a wonderful house, a wonderful villa with a garden and water fountains and a very elegant car and family, everything. And it all looks good in the newspapers. But then also you have an underground secret. And this is maybe the tens of millions of lives and some scars that you have, but that don't show up in this life. You know about the different, the 3 karma, you know, so you have different accounts of karma. And not every karma or not everything to be worked on is actually supposed to surface in one life. A very small portion only is supposed to surface. Now, in this life, when you have decided by the guidance and grace of Guruji to actually bring a finishing point to the whole story and attain that realm of Krishna, then of course everything has to come up. Everything. And Guruji, I would estimate by his grace, he makes the whole thing, like he takes most of it. And yet the essences of changing behavior, like going into the relationship with God, that is still up to us. But that is still so much to make our lives so dynamic and heavy at some point that also here, very easy to say, crazy people. Third point, what we do is pretty much opposite to the mainstream Zeitgeist. And this is a German word, and this means what the mainstream is into, what the mainstream believes. So, a couple of points. I think there's many more. We are chastised in sexualized times. So, as I always like to give the example, if you just want to buy some toothpaste and you have a naked woman on the advertising, then this is everything is over-sexualized in these times. Everything, you know? And it is so important, for example, and promoted even, like for youngsters or for teenagers, just have sex early, you know, go into that, and maybe you have a child or be pregnant when you're 14. Like, this is so horrible. But we live in sexualized times, and of course there is an agenda of destruction behind it, but let's not go into that. But what we do is we don't have sex. I mean, there's a lot of yellow people here. And I'm not saying like we don't have sexual thoughts, but at least the decision was there to see, oh, maybe there is something better, and maybe there is something truly fulfilling, you know. And regardless of what everyone's experience, be you a devotee, not devotee, is with, let's say, physical sexual experience or mental sexual fantasies, etc. Like, what we do as a tendency is to say there is something different. And like this, you create something which is which is against the zeitgeist, because suddenly you get labeled as crazy when everyone is saying is engrossing themselves in sexualized times, and you say, no, you know, maybe I go to a Hindu temple and celebrate there over the weekend, and we don't have alcohol, we have vegan food, we don't have sex, etc. You know, it is something very crazy to do. Next point, you have vegan. We are vegan here, and we are vegan in times of supreme animal slaughter. I don't know how many, right now, I don't know how many animals have to die, like 10,000s, and maybe the 20 minutes I give the satsang, how many animals worldwide are suffering and dying because we live in times of animal slaughter. And we don't do that. We say no to that, due to various reasons. First reason is, let's say even egotistic reason is, we don't want to have that on our back. Because for sure, if you consume, if you participate in that, you are participating. You will have it on your back, and it will come at a later point in terms of maybe as a disease, or you get slaughtered or whatever, you know. So we don't do that. We say no to that. We are vegan. And maybe today is much better than maybe 10 or 20 years ago, but easy it is to say, you're crazy. I mean, how many times my father has told me, like my own father has told me, you're crazy. How many, like, almost war at the dinner table to say, no, it's okay, I don't take the steak, you know. What, you don't take the steak? He took it as a declaration of war. And it's funny because it's mostly not the vegetarians and the vegans who are so much into the discussion. They just say, no, I just prefer rice and potato. It's fine, you know. But then, no, it's mostly, let's say, the other side of meat eaters who say, why not? Yeah, so why not? Because we're in some ways opposite to the zeitgeist. Guruji even said, if you want to be successful in today's times, do something which is opposite to the zeitgeist. Strong point also what we do opposite to the zeitgeist is we surrender to God, or try, in a time of egotism. It is celebrated, and you're the greatest person today, and you will appear on the various celebrity lists if you live your egotism, if you live egocentrism. I recently discovered I'm super selfish. And this is not to distinguish between, let's say, outside spiritual people and outside non-spiritual people. Like, there's so many good people also who don't have such big ego, and they're active in the world as well as in the ashram. And there's big egos in the ashram as well as in the world. But we do try in Bhakti Marga to surrender to God in times of where the opposite is celebrated. You know, do something which is against the will of God. Just look in the media. Look at what you have to see. I mean, look at what you have as movies, and, you know, it's mostly about horror and killing and bad images. What we celebrate here, if you look at the murtis, we are celebrating the most positive images. That's why we have murti, to put that in our mind. But it's very opposite to what the world outside wants to put into your minds. Okay, next point is 4. What we have recognized is that ultimately you are alone with God. And for that also you can get labeled as crazy, because if you delve too much into the illusion or delusion of the world and say, "Oh, we'll always be together, we'll always be happy, and we'll always be there for each other." And then the last day comes. Even when you marry, like I was married, and I remember that the priest said, "Until death will divorce you." Now, as a side note, we got divorced earlier, but still the saying is, until death will divorce you. So it is included already in the fact of marriage that you get divorced. So not saying anything against marriage. Actually, I liked marriage. It was okay. I really liked it. But we are doing something here that as spiritual people, you do recognize at some point you will be alone with God. And when you go through intense, let's say, previous points, purification, or you have a goal to attain the feet of Krishna, then you easily get labeled as crazy. Because the fear in the zeitgeist is there that it might come true, that actually on the last day you might be alone on the deathbed and nobody is there and actually cares. How many stories Guruji tells in his satsangs about people dying and nobody really cares? I can die today and nobody really cares. It's true. And because that's true, us being sincere devotees, we recognize that as a fact. Is actually what really counts, the only thing we have is the connection with God. So let's go 100% all in. That's our investment strategy. To go fully into Gopal, or to go fully into this path of bhakti. And yes, that also can be labeled as crazy, because it's, why are you spending 6 hours per day in the temple? If you allocate the time that you have daily to invest, then other people who have other goals, they invest their time, their resources differently. But we invest them not only 6 hours in the temple, then we go to Seva, then we do Kriya, then we do this, then we do that. Everything associated. Like as said, we go all in, 100%. That's bhakti. And that is crazy, because we know on the last day you will be alone. And then will be the big question, how much of your life have you actually invested into that being alone with God. Crazy people. Next point. Spiritual people, they're open to the irrational world. Everyone thinks that the mind is rational, especially in times where men are in power. Everything has to be rational. It has to fit in a Monday board. It has to fit in an Excel sheet. No, but there's many more dimensions other than 2 dimension, you know. So although we do work with Excel and Monday boards and Bhakti Marga also, I would say that we are much more open to the irrational. Irrational is, you can't explain it. I have a ring here, Guruji made it. You can't explain how he did it. I don't know, I don't question, I don't bother about it, I'm happy to have it, you know. For sure, each one here in the ashram today, you'll have 5 or 10 experiences that you can't really explain it. You have a question in your heart, somebody will walk around the corner and you talk about that same topic and he will give you an answer. That comes from Guruji, you know. Or you need to learn something. You need to correct your behavior. Today it will happen, you get the lesson, you know. You can't explain all these things only in the rational way. So people who are not really open to the irrational world, they too much believe in the brain of the mind. And the brain of the mind can solve cool things. The brain of the mind has no access to things like, if I go into this, will I be happy? No, it can only analyze, if I go into this, maybe I have 50 and 25 and 10 and 10 and 10. It cannot perceive in the same way. There's a whole purpose of Atma Kriya Yoga. We move from the brain of the mind to the brain of the heart. And you have a completely different perception when you are operating from the brain of the heart. But the brain of the heart is very often irrational. How do you say? If I go into this, if you have first impression of a person, not a good feeling about it. Can you rationalize it? Can you explain it from the brain? No, I can't. But the feeling about it, it doesn't tell me any good, so I stay away. And it was a good decision. When I didn't know about this, let's say also before I practiced Atma Kriya Yoga, then I did some things where I didn't ask the brain of the heart, but the logic told me this is a very good thing to do. And 7 years later, I was divorced. So last point. In essence, we could say that truly spiritual people can be labeled as crazy because we're worshipping something else. That's it. If anyone is against the norm of what you think, what should be worshipped, if there is another person worshipping something else, then also we label those people as crazy. There was living a guy in my apartment block, and he openly and enthusiastically, he was a devotee of soccer. And he said, on Sunday I will go to the temple. He literally said that. He was a very nice person. And we had our bhajan group, and he knew what we were doing. But it was very, in a nice way, obvious that we labeled him as crazy, and he labeled us as crazy. So wherever there is a difference of true belief, there is a difference of vibration. And it doesn't really go together. But the essence of Krishna says in the Gita, be aware of what or who you worship, or of who is your deity. And it doesn't go overnight. Let's say, oh, let's just change what I believe in. No, it takes really a long time, because what you truly believe in, you know, it really takes a long time. And even you might be sitting here or coming to the events, and then we display a great effort. We display a great enthusiasm, and we jump around. But the motive of why we're jumping around, that will be something really interesting to look at. And that is the true deity. Yeah? Why are you doing the things? Yeah? Does it give you status? Are you hoping for a better position? Will you get the look from Guruji? And that will inflate our ego, all of these things. Or is it really the surrender to God? So this whole idea of Krishna to who is your deity, most of the people, they have different deities. And even when you look at of the stories in the Bhagavatam of the demons, etc., they all had their deities also. Their deity was greed. They wanted to pray to God to get power, and they got power. And then in the end they perished, etc. And coming back to the Gopi verse in the beginning, they really had only this deity of Lord Krishna. And they were so secure and so natural and so 100% all into that they even went beyond this, worshipping God, worshipping the Lord. They really attained that love for God. And maybe even if we would meet a gopi today, because of our state, we would potentially judge such a person as well. Because the saints are the saints, and there's always such a different of level of vibration that they live, so that even the tendency or the temptation is there to say, like, anyone who worships a different deity that you truly worship is crazy. So we are not better in any way, but this is, I think, a very human thing. But it really has to do with what deity you worship. So the satsang is to encourage you to worship Śrīmad Narayana. Jai Gurudev.